But let's open the discussion up a little bit. To open up the discussion, first, we want to look at the key principles of public-private partnership arrangement. So, key principles of public-private partnership arrangement. Because you see, to be able to execute what has been agreed on, there are some principles that must govern each public-private partnership arrangement. There are rules and regulations that must guide the way these things are supposed to be done. So, what are the principles of public-private partnership arrangement? Let's look at a number of them. The first principle is value for money. Now, this principle states that the public-private partnership project should not cost the country beyond the expected amount payable under similar circumstances in other countries. So that's the first thing, value for money. The fact that we are bringing in a private investor and the private investor's goal is to maximize profit does not mean we have to pay more than a similar project executed under different conditions or in different countries in our contract or in our arrangement. That's the first principle, value for money. But you see, there are three elements of value for money that we need to understand when it comes to dealing with value for money. And that is economy, obtaining resources at the least cost. Then we go to efficiency, looking at the relationship between the input and the output, meaning getting the best possible outcome from the utilization of resources. And then number three, effectiveness, that the intended project will meet its objective. That is what we mean by value for money. So let's say that again, if we come back here, toilet facility. Government has undertaken that under a public-private partnership arrangement. Okay, so how much will each toilet facility cost the government? Or will it cost? Then the contract has arranged that each toilet facility will cost $100,000. Economy means per the facility there, is it worth $100,000? Or we are paying exorbitant amount of money? That is a concept of economy. The amount that we are paying for the project, is that what we are supposed to pay? And so one way to resolve the issue about economy is to ensure that when a covered entity or government is intending to undertake a PPP project, they have to do that in a competitive environment. In other words, there has to be various private investors, various private contractors who are coming in so that through a bidding process, government can select, or the entity can select the one that will help us to not break the bank but still get the thing. Then efficiency is a relationship between the input and the output. So if 100,000, what are we getting out of the 100,000? Then the last one is effectiveness. Is the project that we have put across achieving its intended objective? So if we say we want to prevent people from poo-pooing in the bush and poo-pooing by the sea, so we are building this toilet. But then the toilet has been built, but people are not using the public toilet and they are still poo-pooing by the sea and poo-pooing in the bush because, the natural air and the experience that they will have is so succulentious. That means the project is not achieving its intended objective. So on the overall, maybe we did not achieve value for money in that project. That is the first principle of all PPP projects, value for money. The second principle is risk allocation. Every PPP project must table out and give detail on the various risks that are associated with the project, and most importantly, how those risks will be borne. In other words, who will be responsible for what risk? The government. What risk is the government responsible for to handle? Investors. What risk are they responsible to handle under the contract? That is the idea about risk allocation. But it is important you also understand that when it comes to risk in public-private partnership arrangement, there are types of risks. So let's go through some of the types of risks quickly when it comes to public-private partnership arrangement. The first one is called construction risk. What is this? This represents all the issues that may arise at the construction phase of the project. So, cost overruns. Maybe we wanted to build a public toilet and it will cost $100,000. But by the time we started, because of inflation or economic issues, there are certain things that had to be imported and all of that. Now we are going to spend around $150,000. That extra $50,000, no, it's called construction risk. In a PPP arrangement, the question is, who bears that risk? Who will bear that risk? Is it a private investor or the government? Or it will be borne by the two parties who bears the risk? But that is the idea about construction risk. Then building material defects. So the materials that have been bought to use to undertake the project, by the time we started construction, we have identified some defects in them. Who bears that risk? Whose responsibility is that? Then, technical deficiencies. All these are construction risks. Then we come to the second type of risks, and that is availability risk. This refers to the risk that the infrastructure may not be sufficient for the end users. So this risk comes at the end of the project, that we've done the thing, it is ready for use, but it is being overwhelmed. The fact that it is not enough to serve all the people. That is the concept of availability risk. Now, the reason why this may come up may be because of poor planning and poor execution of the project. Because if we have, say, a community that is having maybe 50,000 people in the community, and we are doing public toilets, and 50,000 people, you build or construct only 10 public toilets in the community, and that is all there is, I think that there will be an availability risk. Because, I mean, people get up and they got to poo-poo, and there are only 10 public toilets in the city, or in that town, or in that location. There will be problem. So, to prevent that, imagine. Sorry, I'm using poo-poo, okay, but I hope you understand, so bear with me. So imagine you get up early in the morning and then you want to poo-poo. Then you go to the public toilet. There is a long queue there. I mean, how many people can hold it and say, I'm going to wait until Kofi Ama Ajua Akosua Kukua Ohema finishes before I go? By the time you realize, people will just revert back to auto reset. Let's go by the bush. Go poo-poo in the bush. Some natural air will pass by you. My God, that feeling is overwhelming feeling. So that is the concept of availability risk. That although the project is done, it can be used, it may not be sufficient for the end users. And that has a lot of disadvantages. 3 is demand risk. So this is the flip side of the availability risk. This refers to the risk that arises as a result of the viability in the amount of service required or consumed by the users of the infrastructure. So the demand risk is you will undertake something and nobody will be interested in it. Or the people who are interested in it are fewer than the capacity. That is the demand risk. So the demand risk is the reverse of the availability risk. Again, why will this happen? Because of poor planning. So although the project is done, many people are not using it. Now, another reason why this could happen is because of the price. Like what I mentioned earlier, end user fee. We want to poo-poo, you are charging 3 Ghana cedi to poo-poo. I'm not going to pay 3 Ghana cedi to go poo-poo. So let's go to the bush rather. That's better. And that is what people will do. So although the facility is available, they will not use it because it is too expensive for them. That is the concept of demand risk. 4, residual risk. This refers to the possible difference between the expected residual value of the infrastructure and the actual value at the end of the agreed period. I will come back to this concept later, but get it here. The concept under PPP arrangement is that there are types of PPP where the private investor build the thing and then maintain it and then get his money at the end, transfer the residual assets to the contracting entity, the government or the covered entity. And so at the beginning of the contract, there will be an expectation that, maybe this is a 20-year deal. At the end of the 20 years, the value of the property you give us is $10 million. But sometimes, by the end of the 20 years, the date that the asset is being transferred or the infrastructure is being transferred to our entity, the value of the property is just $5 million. So the difference between the expected amount, 10, and the actual amount at the date of the transfer, 5, is called the residual risk. The question again is, who bears that risk? But that is something we must understand when it comes to public-private partnership arrangement. 5, financing risk. I believe you don't need miracle on this one because, the eating is in the pudding or whatever. Those of you who went to Montessori, you know what that means because it's obvious, right? It refers to the risk that full funding required for the project will not be obtained at the expected interest rate or may not be available or accessible. That's financing risk. Because remember, the private investor is not that they have the money sitting there. Sometimes the private investor will go borrow the money. Because, it is cheaper to borrow money to use it for your business, for tax purposes, rather than using your own money. So the risk that when we want to now begin the project, we thought that we will borrow the money at 10% interest rate, only for the project to commence, and now we are supposed to pay 15%. We thought that we will get the $10 million for the project, only for us to go to the bank when the project was about to start, and the bank says, hey, we are facing situations by ourselves, so we can only get you $4 million. What happens? How do we get the extra funding to pay for the project? That is financing risk. Then number 6 is maintenance and operational risk. Again, this is obvious. You don't need a miracle on this. Maintenance and operational risk. These relates to all the other issues arising in the operations of the infrastructure, the regular maintenance, making sure that the asset is operating at its optimum capacity. Who bears that risk? Who pays for that? That is the idea about maintenance risk. It's important you note this, that the risks must be allocated to the party, that is either the contracting entity or the private investor, with the requisite expertise to manage the risk effectively in order to maximize value for money. Because if it is about financing and it is a private investor bringing in the money, then issues about financing risk, the private investor should have the expertise to handle it. If it is about the day-to-day running of the infrastructure after it is done, then based on the contract, who is supposed to bear it? If it is the government that is going to run it, then the government bears that. So we have to know these risks because it must be allocated to the party with the expertise to be able to deal with the risk so that on the overall, we can maximize value for money. So these are the things we must understand when we talk about types of risks. And this is a specific question the examiner can throw at us in the exam hall that we need to be mindful of. So principle number 1, PPP projects must achieve value for money. Principle number 2, risk allocation. Principle number 3 is ability to pay. If end users are going to be charged, then determining the price or the amount to charge the end users, the purchasing power of the end users must be considered. Remember the example I gave earlier, that we want to deal with sanitation, increase personal hygiene, and so by that, we want to discourage people from poo-pooing at the sea or poo-pooing in the bush. Okay? But then we have the public toilet, and you are charging end users 3 Ghana cedis. They're not going to pay 3 Ghana cedis to go poo-poo. So when you are charging them, you must consider the ability of the end users to pay. If it is too expensive, they won't pay. So then there will be demand risk. That is the idea there. So that's what you must understand when we talk about the principles of ability to pay. And then the number 4 is local content. One of the key issues in each PPP project is that there has to be some local content involvement. What does that mean? It means that if we are dealing with the partner in question, and the private entity in question is especially a foreign entity, and they are going to undertake the project, they must ensure that if there are things available in the country, there are companies producing some of the inputs they will need, there are expertise in Ghana that they will require, they must use Ghanaians. They must buy from Ghanaian producers and suppliers. They must use the Ghanaian expertise. That is the concept of local content. The idea is that will become like a transfer of knowledge and technology and expertise, so that there will be a time coming in the future we wouldn't have to bring in foreign entities to come and do the same thing, because we have built the capacity of our local industries, expertise, firms to be able to do the same thing going into the future. That is the concept of local content. So as much as possible, if it is available, then the contractors, the private entities, must use the local content. Very important. Then the principle number 5 is transfer of skills and knowledge. And that is what I was tying into this local content principle. That at the end of the day, if we are going to be dealing with a foreign person, a foreign entity, then they must have as part of their plan in undertaking the project to train, to transfer skills, knowledge, expertise, technology to locals. These are some of the principles we must understand. So, the types of risks is a question the examiner can access. The principles of public procurement is a question the examiner can access.